Huawei Singapore has been working closely with our partners for the past 20 years to digitally transform businesses and revolutionize the way we live, work, and play. Since 2001, we have also been playing our part to support Singapore's vision as a smart nation. Huawei has been committed to empowering digital transformation and innovation, nurturing a future-ready talent pool, and driving sustainable growth for the future economic together with our local partners. We see this as our responsibility, not just as a global ICT leader, but also a member of the community that is looking to create economic opportunities and societal impact in Singapore. The pandemic has changed the way we live and work forever and accelerated the demand of ICT technologies. This makes digitalization more important than ever. We need to develop talent to ensure that we can thrive. As such, Huawei has launched talent development plans that provide on-the-job training, industry attachments, and specialized courses so that fresh graduates as well as mid-career talent are given the opportunity to help them be part of our evolving digital society. We are committed to cultivating talent to become Singapore's next cohort of trailblazers and better seize the exciting opportunities regionally and globally. But our efforts will amount to nothing if we do it alone. Therefore, we have been working closely with our local partners to nurture talent and build a vibrant ecosystem where everyone can succeed together. This year serves as a new chapter for us to forge stronger collaborations with our local partners and customers to make Singapore a more cohesive, digitally connected, intelligent nation. As we celebrate our 20th anniversary today, I am heartened to see how far we have come, and I appreciate all the hard work our teams, customers, and partners have put in to get us here. Thank you all very much. A new world awaits. Happy 20th anniversary, Huawei Singapore.
Good afternoon and welcome to this interesting session. The past 2 years have brought about change that will determine how we work, live, and play, as the Huawei CEO just mentioned. The pandemic has made us more dependent on technology, and this dependency is something that will remain long after COVID-19 has gone. While this is a good thing in terms of productivity and connectivity, technology, we must never forget, is a double-edged sword. It brings both good and bad, such as privacy issues, hacking, doxing, and various other things that is always in the news. So within this period, how do we maintain transparency and governance amidst this innovation? So hopefully in this session, we can explore trust in technology and what really means. We have a set of experts who will touch on this subject and share their views on what is the way forward to build a connected, secure, and trusted future. We'll start off today's session with 3 insightful presentations. And for the first one, will be given by Philip He, who till the end of last year was Assistant CEO of the Infocom Media Development Authority of Singapore. In January this year, Philip formed an industry consortium consisting of companies such as Tufsuit, a global independent assessment company, IBM, KPMG, Alibaba, and others to develop the Credence Data Trust rating, which was launched in September this year. Philip, welcome to the show, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Huawei and Gulf Insider, for inviting me to this exciting webinar. So, the topic of digital trust has been much discussed, as Amit has said, over the last 2 years, and there were a lot of very conceptual discussions going around. So I thought I wanted to anchor it to something more practical as to what do we do about digital trust. So the topic of my discussion today is about measuring the trust. So why is it that we need to measure trust? We look at some of the key stakeholders that are out there, regulator. For the regulator, they want to know what's the state of compliance. Having come out with the law, actually, how many companies out there are actually practicing what the law actually requires? As Amit have said, I was recently from IMDA. I come from a regulatory environment. I understand what it means to want to know actually what is the state of the situation out there for the industry that I regulate in. Then for the consumers that are interacting with all the organizations, the question they ask is actually, who can I trust, right? Because every company will declare that, oh yeah, your data is safe with me, I will do all these practices. But how do I know? I mean, it's all your declaration. Then there are data partners, especially big companies have with large data ecosystems, they have many data partners. There is a big complexity in terms of their due diligence to know whether their partners are actually up to the mark when it comes to the handling of data. So when I share with the data with someone, how am I assured that he is actually qualified to handle it? The last one being the investors, right? The investors will also want to know for an organization how well they're doing, because the penalty for a data breach is getting to be very high. And so they want to know that all the companies are being prepared. So those are the drivers for the measurement of trust. I mean, you talk about measurements, you talk about compliance, the immediate mindset is one of pain, right? Because all of us who have gone through compliance will know that it's a very painful process. But should we just look at it as a pain, or should we look at it as an opportunity? So with a trusted system in place, a measurement system in place, it's actually easier and having a more robust system of managing our data partners. Now, studies have also showed, especially those conducted in the US, that consumers who trust tends to purchase more. I do not have the data with me, but those are the various reports that I've been reading coming out from the US. And lastly, because of the strong data ecosystem partners that you have, you're going to get more data. With more quality data, you are able to provide better services. Why? Because of AI. So there are actually opportunities, not just a pain in terms of compliance with the law. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about this data ecosystem, because that is something that, especially big companies will appreciate, which is a strong data ecosystem speeds up AI development. Why? Because we know about the 4 V's of big data, right? Volume, variety, veracity, and velocity. Well, when I have more data partners, I have more of the same type of data coming from them. I got different types of data. The volume of the data coming is faster. And of course, different sources of data helps to enhance the accuracy of the data, which actually, when you put all this together, contributes towards the AI development of companies that are using that for their competitive advantage. Now, to meet the need, we therefore have developed a Credence Data Trust Rating System, where we focus on 3 areas: corporate governance, data governance, and technology of data, that will answer the questions of the stakeholders. And the 4 key stakeholders are the regulators, the consumers, the data partners, the investors. And collectively, their concerns are in 5 areas that we have summarized. One is compliance, accountability by the management in terms of what they're going to put in place, communications, not just with the users, but also with their data partners, the exercising of user rights. And finally, the most basic of all is data security. So what can we do with this rating system? Again, if we look back at the trusted ecosystem, it creates visibility. So let's use the example, right? A chain master who is a e-commerce company. He probably has a very deep chain. He supplies, he shares data with his logistics partner, and the logistics partner will share with other logistics partner, because we know that that's a very long chain. It's a very deep chain. Then he also might share more sensitive data with, let's say, their digital marketing partners, and maybe they share with a wide range of digital marketing partners because they try to reach a very wide audience. And they also have strategic partners where they share sensitive data. Now, with such wide ranging need, having a rating system will help them to manage, so that they know that if the data is more sensitive, then the partners better get a higher rating. If the data is less sensitive, then maybe a medium rating would be suitable. So supply chain visibility of data partner capabilities is what the rating system will provide to a data ecosystem. And the robust due diligence system relying on independent third-party assessment based on industry standards will allow the company to achieve his due diligence for its data partners. And but here in Singapore, under the PDPA, it places quite a bit of obligations on the data controller, the one who collects the data, to make sure that his data partners are actually complying with the law. So this definitely helps, especially those companies with a very deep, wide, and a chain with sensitive data being exchanged. Now, if we look at the digital, the data trust rating, actually, the way we look at it is forms the third leg of what enterprises will require moving forward. Now, we are very familiar with financial ratings, right? There are so many credit ratings that have been, there are credit ratings that are out there, which all of us are very familiar with. And over the last 15 years, social ratings. So this whole issue of ESG has been around actually for 15 years or more than 15 years. But over the last 3 to 4 years, this has been a very hot topic. So everyone talks about sustainability. But in the area of digital, actually, there are no rating systems out there. So the data trust rating system will form one of the core ratings for the digital operations of a company. Now, as we all know, the economy is getting more and more digitalized, so data is going to be more and more important. So the interest in measuring a company's ability to manage data through a data trust rating system, we feel will be more important moving forward. And given that I only have 10 minutes to share, let me just summarize to say that this is our data trust rating framework, where we measure companies on 3 areas to meet the factors of trust, the 5 factors of trust of the stakeholders that are out there, of all the enterprises, and the business value proposition of undergoing a data trust rating is, number 1, they achieve regulatory compliance, which is great because the penalty is high. They gain consumer trust, and internally they will be able to achieve operational efficiency because we focus on a lot of business processes, including those processes with their data partners. And with the ability to measure the data ecosystem, there will be greater data sharing. And finally, this will provide assurance to their investors and the management that the company is doing well as far as the management of the data that they have on hand. So with that, thank you very much. I will talk a little bit more as we go into a panel discussion later on. Over to you, Ahmed.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. Thanks for a very insightful presentation. I have a few questions which we can, sort of pick up during the panel discussion. Next, I would like to invite Associate Professor Warren Schick of SMU, and his area of expertise is IT law and disruptive technology law. Earlier, he used to be a public prosecutor and also specialized in free trade and other international agreements. So he has a very good understanding of the law behind trust. So Warren, you want to start your presentation? We're all interested to hear about from you.
Thank you, Amit, and thanks to the organizers for organizing this as well. It's great to share with all of you. And I've thought Philip's presentation very interesting to talk about measuring trust. So my part is actually the role of the law and the government in terms to build trust in the industry, to build trust in technology and the industry as well. Because of course there is a very, very important role for the government to play, right, in building an environment for trust, and also to ensuring, of course, that the private sector adheres to certain principles and certain rules as well. And there are 3 requirements that I identify. First of all, of course, there must be certain rules and regulations to follow. The government has to have some oversight and to provide some framework of rules for compliance. And then, of course, there is also industry guidelines, which will be very useful. Industry should produce their own rules as well. And of course, behooves companies and organizations to come up with their own rules. Because for one thing, the first off is that you can set your own parameters, and then, of course, assure the government that you're complying. So it, in a sense, preempts the government from imposing rules on you that you may not want. The other thing being that, of course, it also is good for the industry itself to build trust, because the more trust you have, the more people will be willing to use your services, to buy your goods if you're in the area of selling goods, and to basically generally to transact with you. The other requirement for building of trust is really personal agency. Right? You must give the individuals, the consumers, society itself, certain autonomy and control over information relating to them, in particular personal information or personal data, sensitive information, as well as the control over information that has an impact on their life. The third requirement is openness and transparency. Transparency is very important, because the less I know about something, the less I know about the technology that's being used that can have an impact on me, the more distrust is formed. So, of course, the flip side is the more openness and the more clarity in what is happening, what organizations are doing vis-a-vis my information and with me, then, of course, the more willing I am to share, and the more willing I am to also to transact with these companies or agencies. So let's talk about the first part, which is the National Technology or AI Strategy. And I think Philip can tell you a little bit more about this, being from the IMDA. But certainly our country in Singapore has taken a very, very, very active approach in building this smart nation or digital governance framework. This is very important, not only to drive for the efficiency of how the country develops and how governance develops in the country, but also, as I mentioned a couple of times as well, we are in a situation where we need to pivot to the use of technology and to building the tech industry, rather than to rely on the old industries now, because now technology is more important than ever in how we transact, in what we do, in how we communicate. So that's this framework is very important. And this framework is led, of course, by IMDA, other government agencies, and also this entity that's built up, the AISG, right, which provides for research and also funding for development of artificial intelligence as well. So a lot of money is being invested in that. And there must, of course, be constant government and industry communication as well, right, in order to set, again, the rules at play. And when we're talking about technology, artificial intelligence, and law, these are the concerns that appear in the AI framework that has been released last couple of years in many countries. The EU has come up with a framework, the trust AI and trust framework. Singapore itself, we are at the version 2 of the AI governance framework as well. So these are the concerns. The first one Philip has mentioned, personality and accountability. There must be compliance with the law and with industry, the industry's own rules and guidelines. And there must be accountability. That means that there must be a bite to these rules, right? So if you do not comply, then there may be some penalties in place in the law. If you do not comply, then of course you lose business as well. So these two go hand in hand, compliance and accountability. The other one being, the other thing that's important focus is the life cycle of technology, right? That means what technology is being used, how is it created, and while it is functioning, while it's being used, there must be certain oversight, right, to ensure that, for one thing, it's not being abused, it does not go, it's not, working in a way that's not meant to work. So there must be assurance that the system is robust. And then there must be constant review to not just improve it, but also to ensure that it's operating smoothly and the way it's meant to operate. And that it's not, you cannot leave technology operating by itself in case it malfunctions, for example, or it does not operate in the way that it's supposed to. And last but not least, you must always constantly evolve it to make it better, right? And also the last but not least, of course, in the use of technology, we must ensure fairness and transparency as well. So for example, a lot of industries, they use algorithms to build profile of users. They use algorithms to assess creditworthiness of users. For example, in the finance industry, you must ensure that it's fair, all right, that it's not discriminatory, and that it is open, so people know what is happening, what is being done with their personal information. So one example of this is the use of regulatory sandboxing, which is quite common in the finance industry. And an example of industry self-regulation is in the finance industry, again, the fintech industry, where the Monetary Authority of Singapore, together with the industry partners, have created their own FEAT principles, the principles of fairness, F, ethics, right, the adherence to certain ethical principles, A, accountability, and T, transparency, which describes exactly what I talked about in the earlier slide as well. So these principles are meant to guide the organizations in that industry, and also to ensure that they comply with the same set of requirements as well. And then on top of that, of course, these must be applied to the AI and their data analytics framework in each of these organizations. The second point to note, and again, a very fundamental point which Philip brought up, is security, right? The less secure data or personal information is, the more distrustful I am, the less likely I am willing to share this information. And security is particularly important if you're talking about very sensitive information or data, like financial information, health information, or information that can affect the critical information infrastructure of a country, like the information or the data that's being used for essential services, the provision of essential services like health services, transport, provision of utility, for example. And we have laws for this. We have the Cybersecurity Act and the Cybersecurity Agency, which oversees the act, which is meant to identify these types of data points, the organizations that owns these types of information, and then impose certain obligations of them to ensure a high level of security compliance. There's a licensing process there. So this, again, ensures that the industry meets a certain standard. And by requiring licensing and by requiring the obligations to be met according to the Act, the government is also setting a standard for the industry to follow and taking the lead in ensuring that the compliance to these standards. The other area of law is actually computer misuse offenses. We have laws in Singapore that deal with computer misuse offenses. That means it makes it punishes and it provides penalties in the event of abuse of computer processes, such as hacking, transfer of information, theft on computer services, and so on. So again, this is where the law provides a bite, where if you do things that affects the integrity of computer systems, and technology, and in turn that will reduce trust in it, we will punish you, and this also provides a strong deterrence and prevention from these kinds of actions. And last but not least, evidence and electronic transactions rules. So we have Electronic Transactions Act. We provide rules for evidence. So the more secure you are, for example, if you're using secure signatures, or if you use digital signatures that offer security, and the more secure your records are, then of course the greater recognition in terms of evidence they have in the courts of law as well. So that means there's encouragement to use secure processes when you're dealing with information. Now, the second point is about personal control. As I said, the more control you give the individuals, the more sense of ownership they have, and the more trust they can have over the processes. So personal control over, of course, personal data, and over the veracity or the truthfulness of information as well. And for that, we have the Personal Data Protection Act, which provides the requirement for assent to access personal information, as well as to ensure accuracy of personal information as well. Now, on top of the PDPA and the Computer Misuse Act, we have laws under the provisions under the Protection from Harassment Act and POFMA itself to ensure accuracy of information, because veracity of information, again, is very important. The more falsehoods that are out there, the less trust people will have over data or information. And so you need to build a system to ensure veracity of information, which is one of the vital V's of big data. And last but not least, transparency and data accuracy. For this, of course, like for example, the PDPA requires there to be that individuals like ourselves can have access over our personal data in the organization's hand, and we can ensure that it is correct, and organizations in turn have an obligation to ensure accuracy of this information. And on the flip side, the laws I get mentioned, POFMA and the Protection from Harassment has provisions to prevent access to and to correct false information or data based on public interest grounds and based on personal interest grounds as well. So those are the points that I want to mention, and those are where the law steps in to help ensure that we have built a system to build up trust in society over technology and in these kinds of technological transactions as well. Thank you for bearing with me, and back over to you, Amit.
Thanks, Warren. You raised a number of very interesting points. We'll go through some of them during the discussion. But before that, I'd like to bring in our final speaker for today, Rene Arnold, who is Vice President Public Affairs Strategy at Huawei in Shenzhen. He works mainly on thought leadership topics, and today he will present as giving us the industry perspective of trust in tech. Rene, would you like to start your presentation?
Sure. Thank you very much, Amit. Let me just find the right window here. And start off with, thanking first of all Golf Insider and Amit for this lovely introduction, and also the two previous speakers for introducing, I think, this really very timely topic of forging digital trust as a collaboration between governments and industry. So first of all, it is my pleasure today to introduce Huawei's or the industry perspective on this point. And let me start out with introducing our company very quickly to you, because I think many people will connect Huawei mainly to the mobile phones and the network that we deploy. But I think, it's important to notice that is not the whole story, because we actually provide solutions across the board to private consumers, to carriers, and to governments and enterprises. And I will go through each of these groups in the examples that I pull out later in the presentation to exemplify how exactly we are trying to build trust in each of those areas. But first of all, let me emphasize that we do a lot more than just nice smartphones and 5G networks. As a matter of fact, we have entered the intelligent automotive components sector. We are providing computing solutions both for governments and enterprises, as well as cloud services, including AI solutions. And we are also active in the space of digital power, trying to push the transformation towards renewable energy globally. Now, as a company with such a broad portfolio, I think it's quite understandable that trust in tech for us is really front and center. But I think it's important to mention, and in a way I'm echoing a point that both Philip and Warren have made before, that it's really about building and sustaining this trust in tech, that it's necessary to benefit from all the technology that we currently have, but more importantly, I think, from all the technology that is still to come. And I think we are ahead of a very interesting decade until 2030. So we expect many, many more connections, both for individuals as well as devices. We see that people will start using more immersive technologies like VR and AR. We also foresee that many of the cars and households are getting more and more connected. Now, as we move forward to this fully connected, intelligent world, it is really important to address the current issues that we see concerning digital trust. And I think they have been pointed out quite succinctly by a white paper that was published in IMD Lausanne Business School. And they emphasized 4 key challenges for digital trust. on the individual, on the technical, and on the organizational and societal level. But they also pointed out potential solutions towards addressing these concerns. Now, on the individual level, and I think that's something that Warren already pointed out, it's really about giving back control over personal data to the individual citizen and to the individual consumer. On the technological level, we need to make sure that we make full use of technological innovation, not just in terms of analyzing data, but also securing data and securing the ethic values that are the cornerstones of our society. So we need AI that is built into, or we need ethics that are built into the AI revolution rather than just bolted on. On the organizational level, it's about embracing the technology that we have and benefiting from it, but also putting ethical checks and balances in place. And on a societal level, and I think this is, again, somewhat echoing the previous two speakers, it is very important that government and the sort of auditing system can keep up with the technological innovation out there. That means that we also need to empower those two stakeholders by technological innovation. Now, how do we as an industry player think the way forward could work, and what would be our three main points to contribute to solving that crisis? First of all, we think that transparency, integrity, and accountability are the key cornerstones of the digital environment as we move forward, and that only through broad collaboration of all shareholders we can really build this trust. Of course, that has to be supported by strong standards that everybody complies to. However, those things alone are not enough as we move forward, and therefore we have established globally 7 cybersecurity transparency centers. These centers offer a way for both our customers, mostly carriers, but also for governments to assess the hardware and software of our company and to make sure that everything is compliant with the current cybersecurity laws and standards. And I think this is a practice that could be perpetuated throughout the sector, ensuring that each and every vendor, each and every provider of digital services can stick and does stick to the same high standards of cybersecurity that form the basis of digital trust. As we move to consumer services, and here I would like to emphasize or pull out our example on Harmony OS that I think really addresses the point that IMD Lausanne mentioned on the individual level of giving back control, empowering consumers to both benefit from the digital technology, but also to regain control over their personal data and make sure that there is no malpractice or abuse happening. And on the one hand, as part of the as far as the digital benefits go, Harmony OS offers a completely new way of thinking an operating system, in the sense that it offers the first fully fledged IoT operating system across many different connected and intelligent devices. And on top of that, enables consumers not just to use individual devices as they are, but also to combine them into what we call a super device that is sharing those resources and interacts with the consumer intelligently. That, however, implies that we need the 3R rule. We need to make sure the right people gain access, the right devices gain access, and that those two actually have only the access that they actually need. And so we can ensure digital trust in this very complex, very intelligent system. As for the businesses and government interaction, I would like to talk 1 minute about our Spark competition that we run in Asia Pacific, and in particular also in Singapore, and point out two of the winning applicants, AIDA and Morpheus Labs, both of which I think exemplify quite well how we as Huawei also try and foster companies, initiatives, and startups in the tech sector to do well and to build solutions that can enhance digital trust. So AIDA uses artificial intelligence to prevent fraud and also speed up the claims process with insurances, whereas Morpheus Labs really builds on the idea of smart contracts and blockchain and the digital trust these solutions offer, and tries to bring its vision to life to build a blockchain platform as a service, including a blockchain app marketplace for third-party developers, which would certainly go a long way in making that distributed ledger technology and that digital trust it offers available to many, many more businesses and individuals. Now, let me finish with a quick wrap-up that I think might also be a good starting point for the panel discussion. Ultimately, digital trust can only happen through the collaboration of industry and government, but also each individual person themselves. And it has to come together from three perspectives. One perspective is certainly the technological innovation, things like homomorphic encryption that really enable us to do many, many more things with data in a privacy conserving way. It has to come from transparency that can ensure adherence to strong security standards, and it has to come from governance that certainly also has to be supported by a good measurement auditing scheme for digital trust, so that true oversight can actually happen. And well, with that, I hand it back to Amit and look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Rene. I'd like you to stay on the stage, if you can call it virtual stage. I would like to now call on Warren and Philip to join us. And, we had a lot of very interesting points raised of what needs to be done to build trust, to keep trust, and what are the safeguards required. These are fine, but I have a very fundamental, I want to take one step back and ask a very fundamental question to each one of you. Now, you see, I'm a company. I realize I have data, customer data. I want to build trust. But how do I go about it? I mean, all these talk about building trust, privacy, transparency, all that I understand. But what are the top three things I need to do? I mean, just to get down to brass tacks. And more importantly, when we are in a situation where your trust lasts as long as your data is not hacked by some malicious actor. So, I mean, how do you do this? So, let's start with Rene. Rene, you want to first start and give it a perspective, and then we can go to Warren for government aspect, government angle to that, and then Philip can talk about the regulatory areas which we need to look at, or the transparency index.
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. Well, I mean, where to start really? As a company, I think it is really important, to build a culture of data protection and security from the bottom up. And it's not just the cybersecurity officer who is in charge of security. Ultimately, it is each and every one employee of that company. And as you rightly pointed out, trust for a company has to be built across many, many years and can be lost in an instant. And as we know, many of the cybersecurity issues have ultimately their root cause in human error. So I think that is really the most important starting point. On top of that, The second point for me would be, of course, to implement always the latest and best technology that is out there, to ensure that your cybersecurity is really up to the cause, and to continue this development. But then I think on a third level, and this comes back to the point that I was trying to make about innovation, as we move forward and data becomes more and more a central part of the business, a central part of the value creation, I think it is also extremely important for companies as they go through the digital transformation to think about how they can ensure the quality of the data they use, the ethical concerns that might be attached to that data, or the algorithms they develop from that data, and of course to also make sure that the way they then roll out those applications is in line with not just the security concerns or risks, but also in line with the broader ethical and societal concerns that we have.
Yeah, thanks, Rennie. Very good summary of what needs to be done. Warren, you want to add something on that?
Yeah, just 2 points. Building from what Rennie said, that other than the people in the organization, right, because everybody has access to some information, I think the processes must be very clear as well. I mean, it's of course best always to harness the best technology, the most secure technology and everything. But practically speaking, not every organization has, can pay for that, right? You talk about small SMEs, small medium enterprises. They may not have the money to get these kind of services or to pay for these kind of services. So the processes in the end is very important. And the other thing to, of course, to minimize any issues of data leak or anything of that sort will be really to practice data minimization, because I think a lot of organizations, they over collect information and then they have it everywhere. So you only keep what is necessary and what is required, and that's easier to manage. And then have processes where you lock up these things, and you don't really need very secure processes or technology to do it. I mean, if you just, for example, just keep it in a laptop that's not connected to the internet, that's data localization within the organization, that can work fine as well. So there are ways to go about it without spending too much money. The thing on the government side is, of course, I mean, the thing is, for trust, it's always best to not lose it, because again, once you lose it, it's very hard to get it back, right? So one thing the government did was, for example, when you talk about personal data protection, the latest amendments required mandatory breach notification, and I think that builds trust, because the faster you tell people, oh, this is a problem, we had this issue, we are dealing with it, the better you sort of, the better is to maintain trust, because now people know you're on top of it and you are being transparent with me and you're updating me on what's happening. It's better to do that, and that is mandated. In fact, there's a requirement, provided you meet certain requirements like significant risk and sufficiently large exposure under the PDPA. It's better to do that than to hide things. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, we had this data leak with the health authorities and everything. And it took 2 years later when people found out about it. And then people say, oh, you're trying to hide things, you're trying to cover things up. Whereas, now if you immediately go, like, for example, DBS's system went down yesterday and everything. And I think that it's good, to really constantly tell people, oh, we are doing this, we're dealing with it in this way and that way. And people can say, okay, at least I know what's happening. And by being aware of that, I can ask questions if I need to, and I can, on my part, maybe take certain precautions as well. And that helps to maintain trust. So maintaining the communication, and the law, by mandating that, also in a sense is pushing that agenda to the organizations.
Yeah. Thanks. Philip, you want to add something from the perspective of, we are understanding that we need to build trust, we need to maintain trust, but trust is a sort of a very vague concept, and that comes back to what you do best, is measure trust. So how do you like, say I'm a company A, I have certain data which I think I'm keeping it in a transparent manner, and you can measure it for me. Then you have a company B, they also have the same thing, and you measure. How can we compare that with the transparent? I mean, basically the transparency measure, how can it be across companies, across industries, so that we get a score which instantly we understand that this is a good trust score.
Yeah, thanks. I mean that falls squarely into why we came up with the data trust rating system. When you asked earlier, consumers, why should I trust the company that I've provided the data to? And your question about actually how we measure. So I think the earlier two speakers, in a way, touch on those areas that we are measuring. So earlier in my presentation, I shared that we are measuring in three areas: corporate governance, data governance, and technology or data. So in corporate governance, we do measure the corporate culture. I think that fits squarely to what Rene just said when he said it's bottom up. Because data permeates throughout the organization. It is not just the CSO, the DPO's responsibility when it comes to data, because there are many users of the data throughout the organization, and they need to know their own responsibility in handling the data. So we do measure corporate culture in the area of corporate governance. I think Rene talks about the data, how much you collect, when you should dispose, etc. Those are the things we measure under data governance. And then finally, we also talk about, Rene also talk about technology. I think Warren also talk about technology. So technology data is another area we do measure. But technology, and Warren's correct to say that technology by itself is not good enough, because ultimately it is the way we go about using it. And all those are processes that you need to put in place. And those are the areas that we measure. Now, today in all websites, you're supposed to put a privacy notice, right? And I've gone to one of the government websites and I look at a privacy notice, 600 over lines with 8,000 over words. It is almost impossible to actually, and even for someone who is familiar with the topic, reading it, it's just very difficult to understand what is it that they're trying to tell me. And therefore, this whole area of communications with consumers is also another area that we should be looking at. I think one of us were just talking about it.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Gentlemen, I want to bring in look at this topic from a slightly different angle. We're talking about writing good AI programs which are transparent and which are ethical, etc. We're talking about transparency. We're talking about good government regulation in order to ensure transparency. But I personally think from an outsider perspective that the 800-pound gorilla in the room in terms of transparency and AI and all these things is talent. Where is the talent? When you need to do ethical programming, when you need to get everything in such a way that is fair and all, you need a lot of people who are very knowledgeable in what they do in order to be able to do that. And even in government regulatory side, a good regulator can be only good if they understand the technology as it is. So what do we do about that in terms of transparency? Gentlemen, want to take a shot at that point? Warren, you want to add anything?
You talk about transparency again.
No, I'm talking about the talent required to build ecosystem of transparency. Do we have that both in industry as well as in the regulatory side?
Well, I'm not in the industry, but I think that I think that we are. Certainly you can see that the government has said very clearly that we will put, and they have actually put the money there to enhance. Last year and this year, there's money for you to upgrade yourself. Especially if you don't have a job, okay, now think about a job in the tech sector. So there's certainly money being put in that part of things. In the educational institutions as well, we're coming up with more and more courses to deal with all these kinds of issues. So you have the computing and law course in SMU. We have an entire center researching on these areas as well. So we are building capacity and knowledge. And of course, this leads to the other issue which was mentioned, which is that the more knowledge, understanding you have, then it leads to better things like more transparency and everything as well. And going to what Philip said is, of course, I mean, it's actually good to have a very comprehensive privacy notice or privacy, a lot of information, but it's also good to supplement it with a summary. That's what we always learn, right? Have a big one and say everything is here. If you want very interested, go in to read it, but then have a summarized version for everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, that's why there are some regional projects on meaningful notice. I mean, this whole topic of communicating to the user about data trust is a very complex one. I mean, I was reading this US report where they equate it to almost food labeling. The question is, how much do you tell the user? If you tell it too little, you are not actually telling him enough. But you tell him too much, he get confused about what exactly is happening. So there's a lot of work around this whole concept of meaningful notice.
It's like what you said, that 600 line notice on a government web. I mean, after people get scared.
Yeah.
Rennie, I mean, you're in the industry side, and talent is something which you not only hunt for globally, but you try to nurture as much as possible. So what about this? Do we have the talent to really take trust to the next level so that, transparency and trust can go hand in hand in today's digitalized world?
Well, yeah, I think that is one of the key challenges that we're all facing, that not just the technology sector, but also each and every company that seeks to transform itself digitally. I just wanted to, before I go on to answering your question about the talent, I maybe just wanted to add one little point to what we were talking about before. This, what is typically known as the transparency paradox. The problem of communicating in the right way to the consumer about privacy and data security issues around their usage of services. Well, I think one point that hasn't been mentioned so far in the discussion, and which is, as I was trying to point out, very important to us, is the idea of privacy by design. So that it's not so much about, you still have to have those privacy notices, obviously, for legal reasons, but that it's maybe not so much about those anymore, but much more about that consumers do exactly know that, and they have this real assurance and trust in the technology that they know that nothing suspicious is happening with their data, simply because it's already built into the system. That is, I think, a very important, very substantial and foundational idea of the whole digital ecosystem going forward. Now, in terms of talent, what I think is really an important point here, and this circles back to the whole discussion about data use, AI ethics, and how this all fits together. It, I think, comes down to the point where we really need talent with well-rounded skills, because it's not enough, that you can code. It's not enough that you are good at data science and you understand regressions in neural networks and all that. But actually, you also have to be good at social science and philosophy and legal assessments in order to make a holistic assessment of the software you're developing and the algorithms within that software and how that service is rolled out and delivered to the consumers and its potential impacts down the road. So I think what we're looking at here in terms of talent is a much broader challenge than just increasing the level of technical skills.
Thank you, Rennie. I think that is a big point, very important point which you made. I think that is my personal view, is that is the way forward. But coming back to Singapore, as we all know, that Singapore launched the first AI ethics and governance guidance last year, which makes Singapore an early bird among all the countries. Is there anything we can do to make sure organizations follow the guidance of government-led ethics-based principles? Philip, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, thanks, Amit. Just a correction. The first time we launched it was in 2019.
Okay.
No, still 90.
My bad.
No. Last year there was a second revision.
Yeah. Okay.
So we were the first to publish this. I think in the area of AI governance, I think we are still in the stage of developing the principles. I think we are not ready to start measuring it in an effective way. Because if you look at PDPA, which was issued back in 2012, we are still now talking about basic compliance to data. So this is the current focus now, is to make sure that the fundamentals, that we are able to handle the data properly. Once you're able to handle the data properly, in the governance and meeting user rights, etc., I think the next step is really then talking about measuring companies in their ability to comply with the AI ethics principles that's currently being worked on. And I think that will be coming in the next 2-3 years before we take any serious effort in measuring those guidelines that's been discussed now.
Yeah, well, let me interject.
Yeah,
can I just interject here? Yeah, I think that this one, what Phyllis said is correct, and I think it also must be some form of co-regulation as well. It's, like I said, mentioned earlier on, it's good for the industry to do their own regulation because, again, what are the ethical issues linked to can change according to technology, and it can change according to industry as well, because different industry use different technology and they develop it in different stages. So it's very hard to have one size fit all thing. So it's good at this point in time for the government to say, okay, this is the general framework for ethics. Now we throw it to the industry, and you guys come up with your own industry level standards for compliance, and there may be also a manner of compliance requirements in each industry, and then it goes down to the organizations themselves then to have their own rules tailored to their own requirements as well. And I think we need to go that manner rather than to just everything rely on the government to say that you have to come up with all these rules.
Yeah, and I would like to just add on to Warren's point, because when you talk about AI ethics, see, cybersecurity is universal. Wherever you go, the way you protect your data is going to be similar. But when you talk about AI ethics, and when you start introducing this term ethics, then this whole value system in your society comes into play. And that's where you can have a set of principles in the US and Europe. It may not be as applicable here in this region because we do have a very different culture in some aspect, right? So it introduces a lot of challenges when we try to apply across to different regions. And clearly this is a topic that is still being very widely discussed. And well, we'll see in the next 2-3 years, once it's ready, mature, we will then talk about how to measure organizations in the compliance to AI ethics.
Yeah, that's an important point, Philip, that you raised, is because many of the companies which we deal with on a daily basis are international, global in nature. So Netflix, Spotify, Google, etc. So yeah, for what standards of ethics, privacy, and data do we put on them? The ones that are prevalent in the US or Europe, or the one that is prevalent in Singapore, or etc. But there's another interesting question from the audience. I'd like to throw it to you all, gentlemen, whoever wants to respond to it. The question is, with so many digital processes operating at a level we can't see or understand, what level of transparency is needed? And is there any real-time auditing required by any third party? And if so, how should it be done? Rennie, you want to take a stab at this?
I think that is it's really a good point. I was just sort of thinking about how you would, possibly employ something like a real-time oversight in a real-time data stream on a technical level. I think that would be quite challenging, and I'm not entirely sure if it's actually necessary. Ultimately, I think what it boils down to is, and we're seeing this already, I mean, going on in the industry, especially in the area of artificial intelligence, that most of the solutions that you see out there are actually open source, are actually quite transparent if you know where to find them and where and what to look for. In that sense, I think it comes down to a question of building up the capacity also on the side of the auditing authority and the government to be able to do that kind of auditing as the processes and software and algorithms become more and more open. This will certainly be a task for the future. And I think, again, here, innovation and digital technology might actually accelerate that development also on the side of the authorities that need to assess and audit these technologies. Again, I'm not quite sure if a real-time assessment would really be. I couldn't come up with a specific case where that would be really relevant or necessary at the moment. But in any case, I think transparency, as I mentioned in my presentation, is really one of the cornerstones that we need to ensure digital trust as we go forward in the digital transformation.
Yeah,
maybe
okay,
I just want to
you.
second Renee's point that we might be a little bit too early, to look at compliance down to the process level, because that is really, really detailed. I think even for myself, looking at the measurements today, we are measuring at the organizational level, very broad today. Even that is a challenge. So to try and measure down to the process level, I agree, Renee, that maybe in the future, this might be coming, but you will take a couple more years in this respect.
Yeah, sure. Okay, we're almost running out of time. So just a point. I think what I think are the key takeaways here is that transparency is a must in order to enhance digital trust. But we still are in a process of trying to understand which way the best way, how we can put our best foot forward in terms of getting not only an easy to use digital transparency index or trust or whatever you want to call it, but there's a lot needs to be done, and hopefully we can get it done, because technology is here to stay, and it's going to change the way we live, work, and play. I again use the same phrase. I love the phrase, actually. But yeah, so I think this should be, any last final words from each of you? Quick, one sentence or two sentences before we just wrap up. Warren, you want to?
Well, I think just something that I thought about, because you talk about auditing, it's going to be very challenging. So I think that maybe in the future, you can have technology auditing technology. You could have an AI doing the auditing work. That
machines auditing machines.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? But then, not too far off. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rennie, any final quick thoughts?
I think I couldn't agree with you more, Amit. It's really about collaboration across all stakeholders. It's transparency and accountability, along the same strong standards that will be, the sort of foundation for digital trust as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. Any final thoughts?
Well, just self-promotion. That having an index to measure that trust is what we need in order to do the benchmark. Thank you, and thank you very much for this event.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. It was my honor and pleasure to be with you all on this panel, and hope we can have some more of such interesting discussions. And to the audience, I hope you have found it very productive session, and do reach out to each of the speakers if you want to do any follow-up. And I really hope you enjoyed today's event, and looking forward to seeing more of you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.